It is 3 o'clock in the morning. The world is silent, but your mind is not. It spins through tomorrow's emails, replays an awkward moment from years ago, or simply begs for sleep that never comes. We live in the most advanced age in human history, surrounded by mattresses engineered with space-age foam, apps that claim to optimize our REM cycles, and supplements that promise rest on command. Yet somehow, we are also the most exhausted generation to ever lie down in a bed. And here is the irony. 500 years ago, without central heating, without memory foam, and without the modern sleep industry, our ancestors slept deeper and more consistently than we do today. They didn't fight their biology, they worked with it. Imagine stepping out of your modern, sterile bedroom and into a warm Tudor bedchamber lit only by candles, heavy curtains, thick linens, a bed built not for aesthetics but for survival. Welcome back to Historia Prime. In my search to understand why I kept waking up exhausted, I went backward in time, digging through wills and inventories from the 15th and 16th centuries to decode how people actually slept. What I found wasn't a quaint historical detail, it was a physical system, a carefully engineered, layered structure of straw, wool and feathers designed to cool the body, calm the nerves, and hold you gently in place until morning. And at the center of it all was a simple ritual they called the tuck. This wasn't superstition. It was physics, biology, and human instinct woven into a nightly routine. A 500-year-old technology that modern science is only now beginning to explain. Could this forgotten bed trick be the answer to modern insomnia and nighttime anxiety? Let's step into the past and find out. Part 1. The Modern Trap. Why your $5,000 mattress failed you. To understand why a 500-year-old sleep system might outperform the most luxurious mattress in your home today, we have to confront a simple truth. The modern sleep environment is engineered for softness, not for biology. And biology always wins. At first touch, a foam mattress feels perfect. It hugs your body, it molds to your shape, and it promises a kind of customized comfort. Yet underneath that initial softness lies a design flaw that modern sleep science can no longer ignore. For the human body to fall asleep and stay asleep, its core temperature must drop by about 1 degree Celsius. This tiny shift is what unlocks melatonin, slows the racing mind, and opens the door to deep, restorative sleep. But here is the trap. Modern mattresses, especially those made of dense foams and synthetic polymers, act like thermal vaults. They store your heat, hold it, and then return it to you. As the hours pass, that trapped heat forms a pocket, an insulated bubble that prevents your body from cooling down. It feels comforting at first, the way a warm bath does, but the longer you stay in it, the more your biology fights back. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, the very moment your melatonin should be peaking, your mattress has absorbed all the heat it possibly can. It stops being your bed and becomes your furnace. Your body panics. Cortisol rises. Your nervous system jolts you awake, drenched in sweat, kicking off blankets that were supposed to help you rest. And just like that, the cycle is broken. Heat is only half of the betrayal. Every night, you lose nearly a liter of moisture through breath and sweat. Natural fibers can disperse it. Synthetic bedding traps it. So instead of sleeping in a breathable cocoon, you sleep in a sealed plastic chamber. The result is a clammy, sticky microclimate against your skin, provoking dozens of micro-awakenings your conscious mind never notices, but your exhausted body definitely does. This is the modern paradox. We designed mattresses to feel luxurious at the moment we lie down, but not to support the thermodynamics of actual sleep. We optimized the first 5 minutes of comfort and neglected the next 8 hours of survival. Our ancestors had no choice but to work with nature. Their beds were not status symbols or lifestyle purchases. They were engineered tools, layered systems built to control heat, humidity, airflow, and pressure in ways our synthetic world has forgotten. So before we journey back into the past to rebuild their secret, we must acknowledge the truth. The modern bed, for all its cost and complexity, may be the very thing standing between us and the deep, peaceful sleep our bodies are still wired to crave. Part 2. The Somatic Architecture of 1500. Let's leave the modern bedroom behind and step into the quiet glow of the 16th century, where sleep was not a convenience, but a nightly act of survival. In a Renaissance household, the bed was often the single most valuable possession, more valuable than tables, chests, or clothing. It was not simply something you slept on. It was a piece of technology, layered with purpose, engineered for the human body long before anyone understood thermoregulation or sleep cycles. If we were to open one of these beds like a biological specimen, we would uncover a design so deliberate and so intelligently crafted that it rivals much of what the modern sleep industry produces today. This is the 500-year-old trick. At the very bottom sat the foundation, a tightly woven canvas tick stuffed with straw, chaff, or leaves. It rested on ropes or slats to lift the sleeper off the cold floor. Straw may sound primitive, but its structure is hollow, meaning each stem is a tiny air channel. Air moves through it, dissipating heat, breaking up moisture, and preventing the suffocating thermal bubble that modern foam traps around the body. In one simple layer, they solved a problem we still haven't mastered. Above this came what I consider the engine of the entire system, the wool mattress, often called the flock bed. Wool is a miracle material. It absorbs up to 30% of its weight in moisture without ever feeling wet. It pulls sweat away from your skin, disperses it, and releases it slowly into the air. Every fiber has a natural crimp that traps little pockets of still air, insulating when you're cold, cooling when you're hot. It is active climate control without electricity, circuitry, or apps. Just biology meeting biology. And finally, for those who could afford it, came the crown jewel, the feather bed. A large tick filled with goose or duck feathers, sometimes weighing more than 50 pounds. But unlike memory foam, which collapses and holds heat, feathers move. They shift. They breathe. They create pockets of insulation without sealing you in. Yet the brilliance of this system wasn't only in the materials, it was in the relationship people had with their beds. Each morning, the feather bed had to be shaken, fluffed, and beaten with a wooden tool called a bedstaff. Not to punish the mattress, but to introduce air back into it, to reset the structure, to prepare it for the night ahead. This ritual wasn't optional. It was maintenance. It was interaction. It was a quiet moment of tending to the very thing that kept you alive through cold nights. When all three layers came together, the straw tick, the wool engine, the feather cloud, they formed what I call the heavy nest. A structure that didn't just regulate temperature, but also applied comforting, distributed pressure across the body. It held you, it anchored you, it signaled to your nervous system that you were safe. This ancient architecture wasn't an accident. It was the distilled wisdom of generations who learned, through trial and error, that sleep only happens when the environment works with the body, not against it. And in that layered nest of straw, wool, and feathers, they built a sleep system that modern science is only now beginning to rediscover. Part 3. The Science of the Heavy Nest. Deep Pressure Stimulation. Now that we've seen how the medieval bed was constructed, we can finally explore why it felt so strangely powerful. Why a stack of straw, wool, and feathers could do what modern sleep aids often fail to achieve. And to understand that, we have to step inside the human nervous system. Have you ever noticed how much better you sleep beneath a heavy winter duvet compared to the thin, airy sheets of summer? Or why infants, who know nothing of neuroscience, instantly relax when swaddled? These reactions aren't coincidences. They are ancient, biological responses wired deep within the body. The people of the 1500s didn't have neuroscientific vocabulary. but their beds were built around a principle that modern researchers now call deep pressure stimulation. When someone slid into a medieval bed, they didn't simply lie down, they were held. They sank into a cloud of feathers, but they were covered by wool blankets, fur-lined coverlets, and layers heavy enough to create an unmistakable sensation of containment. It was soft but grounding, weighty but breathable, a physical whisper to the nervous system that the threat of the outside world had ended for the night. Deep pressure stimulation works because the body is equipped with a dual operating system. One part is the sympathetic nervous system, the machinery of fight, flight, dread, and mental spiraling. The other is the parasympathetic system, the engine of digestion, healing, restoration, and sleep. What the medieval heavy nest did, instinctively and consistently, was flip the switch. It shifted the sleeper out of vigilance and into surrender. Modern studies on weighted blankets confirm what our ancestors felt intuitively. Even gentle pressure increases serotonin and dopamine, the brain's natural stabilizers. It decreases cortisol, the hormone of worry and midnight panic. It quiets the mind, not by force, but by anchoring the body, telling it through touch alone, "You are safe now." And yet, even today's weighted blankets can't quite replicate what the past achieved, because their weight is inert. Glass beads and plastic pellets press down without breathing. Over time, they trap heat, and comfort becomes claustrophobia. The medieval system was different. Straw circulated air beneath you. Wool carried moisture away from your skin. Feathers lifted and settled with your breath. Together, these natural materials created what I call breathable weight, a design that grounded the body without suffocating it. Then came the ritual of the tuck. By pulling the sheets and blankets tightly under the mattress, the sleeper created a 360-degree cocoon. Movement was slightly restricted, the startle reflex was softened, and the mind eased its grip on wakefulness. They didn't diagnose anxiety. They didn't measure neurotransmitters. They didn't invent scientific terms for what they felt. They simply knew that a bed should hold you the way an embrace holds a child, firmly enough to reassure you, gently enough to let you drift away. And in that balance of weight and breath, the people of the 16th century built something extraordinary, a sleep technology that calmed the mind not through chemicals or apps, but through touch, pressure, and the physics of being human. Part 4. The Experiment. Building the Past. To understand a technology of the past, there comes a point when reading is no longer enough. You have to build it, touch it, lie in it. And so, I decided to recreate a 16th century bed, not as a museum piece, but as a living experiment to see whether this ancient architecture could calm a very modern kind of insomnia. I didn't start by carving a wooden frame or weaving rope supports by hand, but I rebuilt the layers exactly as history described. First came a firm, breathable base to mimic the old straw tick. Next, a thick, 100% wool topper, the modern equivalent of a flock bed. Above that, a high loft feather bed, loose, airy, and heavier than it looked. And finally, linen sheets, crisp and cool, finished with 2 dense wool blankets whose weight you feel the moment you lift them. What surprised me wasn't the complexity of the design, but the labor. Making this bed is not passive. You fluff feathers, you smooth wool, you pull the blankets tight until your forearms burn. Yet something unexpected happens as you do it. The mind begins to quiet. Modern neuroscience would call it operant conditioning, but it felt simpler than that. By taking just 5 minutes to build my nest, I was signaling to my brain that the day was done. I wasn't collapsing into bed while scrolling through my phone. I was preparing a space for rest, deliberately, almost ceremonially. When the lights finally dimmed and I slid under the blankets, the experience was striking. It didn't have the sinking, marshmallow softness of memory foam. It had structure, support, and immediately The weight settled over me like a steady hand on the shoulder, reassuring rather than restrictive. The temperature was the next surprise. With all that layering, you would expect heat. But the linen felt cool, the wool breathed, and the feathers shifted enough to let air move around me. There was no stifling pocket of warmth, no creeping humidity, just a gentle, stable neutrality. I lay there, waiting for the familiar spiral of thoughts, the unfinished tasks, the deadlines, the worries that usually come alive the moment the room goes silent. But they didn't. The sensory world of the heavy nest took over first. The weight, the texture, the stillness. And for the first time in a long time, my mind yielded. Not because I forced it to, and not because of a trick of psychology, but because my body felt anchored, cocooned, and unburdened enough to let everything else go. In that quiet moment, I realized I wasn't just testing a historical curiosity. I was rediscovering a forgotten conversation between body and environment. A dialogue we once understood instinctively, and one we may desperately need to remember. Part 5. The Results and the Lesson. I woke up at 6:30 in the morning. No jolt at 3 a.m. No overheating. No tossing or turning. Just rest. The kind of rest that feels like someone quietly pressed a reset button inside your body. And the most surprising part was how simple the explanation really was. It wasn't magic. It wasn't nostalgia. It was biology doing what biology is supposed to do, finally given the right conditions to work. The wool and linen created something modern beds rarely achieve: true thermal neutrality. My body temperature dropped that crucial degree and stayed there. Without a heat spike at 3 a.m., my cortisol never surged, and the sleep cycle stayed intact. The weight of the blankets acted like a full-body exhale. That deep pressure stimulation quieted the nervous system faster than any breathing exercise I've ever tried. And the ritual of making the bed, pulling, tucking, shaping, created a boundary between day and night that my overstimulated brain clearly needed. We tend to laugh at the past, imagining people suffering on piles of straw. But the more I study these systems, the more I realize something uncomfortable. It isn't them we should pity, it's us. We traded compatibility for convenience. We replaced breathable natural fibers with plastics that trap moisture and sabotage our temperature. We replaced darkness with screens that glow at 400 nanometers, perfectly calibrated to shut down melatonin. We bought mattresses that never sag but suffocate us slowly through the night. The lesson from the 16th century is brutally clear. Sleep is not passive. It is not something that just happens. It is a craft, a nightly practice, a partnership between body and environment. And to sleep well, the environment must be designed around the biology, not around marketing trends or synthetic shortcuts. You don't need to rebuild a Tudor bed from scratch. You don't need 50 pounds of goose feathers or a straw-packed tick. But you can adopt the principles that made the old system work so brilliantly. Choose natural fibers, wool, linen, cotton, that breathe with you instead of against you. Welcome weight instead of avoiding it, because steady pressure is medicine for a racing mind. And above all, cool your environment artificially or naturally, because every degree your body fails to release is a degree of sleep you never fully reach. As I smoothed the blankets one last time, running my hand over the texture of the wool, I realized that history isn't merely a record of wars and kings. Sometimes history is a survival manual. Sometimes it's a whisper reminding us how to be human in a world that keeps pulling us away from our roots. And sometimes the cure to a modern ailment is wrapped not in technology or medication, but in a 500-year-old blanket. I'm your narrator, and this is Historia Prime. Sleep well, my friends.